First of all, welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight for a conversation on Afghanistan, the country in the heart of Asia. Before I begin a little bit with my speech and my thoughts, I wanted to ask maybe some of you, what sparked your interest, just for my own framework? What brought you here, if I may ask? Was it something on the news you've seen, something you read maybe, or anyone, any thoughts maybe?
Well, I was considering to join Robert on his trip until I got my doubts about the situation about women. But then it turned out that Robert did some discoveries. So.
Perfect. Thank you. So to be travel companion, anyone else maybe any thoughts, any personal or academic interest maybe?
I've read the book by a British journalist who is embedded, and it's called Farewell Kabul. And they had a different opinion about the intervention made by the USA compared to other people. And I would like to hear your ideas about it.
Is that Christian Lamb? Yeah, I think it's Christian Lamb. All right, so that's maybe a final one. Anyone, any final thoughts?
I was mainly concerned about the humanitarian work here. Yeah, because I work in refugee aid program before, so I'm very interested in that. And also, I know some Chinese who been there a few weeks ago, so I heard some story from them, and I wish I could hear some different perspective from the two professors. Yeah. It's a very famous photographer. He's been there for like half a month, and he went to Kandahar, of course, and also stay in Kabul for a while, and he just have many local contact. He's been here for like over 6 times. He already there. He went there in 2012 before, and after the Taliban take over, he went there again. I mean, a few weeks ago. So I heard some story from him. Yeah, about how's the situation like there. He said it's very like after Taliban's takeover, it's becoming much safer here because it used to be many chaos. Like people carry weapons, carry their guns along street. But right now there's less people carrying that all the weapon or something like that. But it's we have to say that the rights of women is still a big issue, but other parts it's kind of peaceful right now situation. Yeah.
So to summarize a little bit, so the Chinese photographer thought it was quite peaceful, but there are some issues maybe with women's rights. That's a little bit also what we will touch upon tonight. So that's a perfect introduction. Thank you. My name is Weiss. I'm a teacher at the University here of Amsterdam. I teach, among other things, one course on IR of the Middle East. I see some of my students. That's nice to see you guys this evening. And you may remember that a year ago, several things happened in Afghanistan in the month of August. What seemed to have been at the outset a rather stable government at the beginning had collapsed in only a few days, as American forces retreated after 20 years of intervention and more than $2 trillion spent. Though the majority of that spending was on the American forces, contractors, and different agencies, still the big question, I think, to most of us is, how did this all happen? Who are the Taliban? where do they originate from, and how does the situation look like now on the ground? Tonight we will discuss some of these questions with the two of us, Robert and me. But as is in the spirit of SPI 25, we invite you to join our conversation. So together we can try to fit some pieces of the puzzle and gain a better understanding. It is my strong belief that if we build bridges between different realities, shaped by different forces of history at play, I think that we can see the world through the eyes of those who are different from us and try to find some kind of common ground. And to this end, we will talk about two topics tonight. We'll begin, first of all, with some thoughts on what led to the Taliban takeover. I'll provide some thoughts on that. And in the second part, our distinguished guest, Mr. Robert van Lanschot, will share with us his observations as he traveled twice through the country. This year, I believe, Robert, that was this year. Robert is a former Dutch diplomat who has served in some of the most interesting places in the world, from Moscow to Nairobi in Kenya. And he currently spends his time, as he says, as a journalist, traveling around the world and documenting and writing and reflecting on what he sees. He often travels to parts of the world that are considered too dangerous by others, or as Robert likes to call it, vivere pericolosamente, which I believe is Latin or Italian for living dangerously. So Robert likes a little bit of an adventure. And that's why in April this year, he traveled to the south of Afghanistan, in the city of Kandahar, where he visited, among other things, the Kirka Sharif, which is an important shrine in the country, and it has played a major role in legitimizing the Taliban power in the region. And Robert will explain more about that later. That was his first travel. And his second travel was only a few weeks ago, in September, when he visited 3 provinces in the north of the country. So from the south in April to the north in September. Those were the provinces, for the experts among us, Balkh, Mazar, and Shabargan. As Robert will share his Afghan stories with us, it will become clear that the picture we sometimes see or have seen in the past is not as black and white as it seems to be. So Robert, we look very much forward to hear more from you about this, especially about some of the wonderful anecdotes you shared during our earlier conversations, because I'm sure everyone here tonight is interested to see how does it actually look like on the ground. How are the people doing whom you have met, and what is the economic situation? And I think for actually all of us, the most important question, it seems that there are some girls' schools open, so maybe you can reflect a little bit on that as well. After Robert's reflections on his 2 visits to Afghanistan, I would very much like to open the conversation with all of you present. Feel free to ask any questions in between or afterwards. We're here for a conversation and a dialogue. But before all of that, let me begin with some general remarks on Afghanistan. And as a teacher, I always begin a little bit with a question. So my first question is, does anyone recognize what we see here? Yeah, it's linked indeed to Alexander the Great. Yeah, exactly. We have someone from Gymnasium, I think, as well present. This is indeed the ancient coin of the Greek Bactrian king of Afghanistan, called Eucratides, who lived about 150 years before Christ. And I chose this object because I think it's important to remember that despite the modern conflict in the country, it actually has a quite long shared history with different civilizations. So there are some Greek influences. You can actually even see the Greek influence on the paper and the symbols of the National Central Bank of Afghanistan. So it's an ancient country, I would say, with Greek influences, Buddhist influences, Islamic influences, of course, and most importantly, Persian influences. For those of us who like to read a little bit more, I added 2 titles which I think could be relevant. The Shahnameh, which is the Persian Homer epic tale of the ancient Persian kings prior to the arrival of the Arabs and the Muslims. And on the right we have the love poems and reflections on life from, maybe you've heard of him, Mr. Rumi, the philosopher and poet from the region. So Afghanistan actually has a long history of, as I said, Greek, Persian, Islamic, and Buddhist culture. But then in the modern times, in the second half of the 20th century, the Soviets entered the country. And with that, there came a strong Marxist Soviet influence, which initiated a conflict in, to be precise, 1979. And from that conflict onwards, up until now, we can still see the impact. There is political instability. There have been many casualties. There has been a civil war, an international war, and so on and so on. But what I would like to do now is, we all get the picture, right? Afghanistan is an old country with a mixed history. But what I would like to focus now on is in the last 20 years, since the United States intervened in the country. And I will try to answer the question, what was the main factor, or what were the main factors that have enabled the Taliban to rise to power last year? And I think there are 4 important factors to be considered. These are mostly external factors because I think they are the ones that we have been able to influence mostly. They have been the result of policy choices decided upon at the heat of the moment, but are also reflective of an institutional approach to the country and the conflict itself, reminiscent of earlier such adventures embarked upon by the British and the Russians. So let's begin with the first one. The first major factor, I think, is the continuously changing political strategy of the Americans. In the beginning of 2001, the focus was on military overthrow of the Taliban regime. And in 2003, as President Bush initiated the Iraq War, Afghanistan was no longer the center of US policy in the region. And 4 years later, in 2007, the US began embarking on a broader mission, not just a military mission, but also a nation-building mission. 4 years after that, in 2011, President Obama initiated a policy of intensifying the conflict with the aim of pushing the Taliban to a military stalemate. Of course, that didn't work out, and that brings me to the second factor. Sorry, before the second factor, this slide, which I added a little bit late, but I think it's a very important one. This is a slide that was added to General what was his name again, to be precise, McChrystal in 2010 in Afghanistan, in an important meeting with all the major political and military leaders of the United States. And the presenter highlighted the most important factors to be dealt with when approaching Afghans and the Afghan conflict. And I think, as most of you think, what the hell does this mention? General McChrystal is supposedly quoted as having said, "Whenever we understand this slide, we will have won the war." And I think this is really illustrative of the ambiguity and unclear political strategy. This brings me to my second point, which is the project of nation building, which was ongoing while there was a conflict in different parts of the country. While schools were built and stories of schools were heard and seen, there were also heavy bombardments in the rural areas and suicide attacks taking place in the city. So the project of nation building was a little bit of a contentious one. And that brings me to the third point, which is that most early warnings were neglected by the US political leadership. And why is that the case? Because for years, actually journalists, government agencies themselves, experts and many others have warned that the mission was not really as successful as we thought it was. To highlight one important actor, has anyone ever heard of SIGAR? Not the smoking thing, but the agency, the US agency SIGAR. So SIGAR was instituted by the Congress to report to the US Congress on a quarterly basis about the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. And this report was based on military intelligence, political analysis, and also consultation with relevant actors in the region. If you look at the reports of 2020, 2021, beginning of 21, 2019, and so on, each time you can read in the reports a very clear warning. Things are not looking good, and if we leave, the situation might become even more problematic. That brings me to the final point, the final factor which I think led to the rise and actually the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is the Trump-Taliban deal. The negotiations started in 2018 because the Trump administration believed early on that Afghanistan was not of strategic value to the country. And so there was a need to end the war. And negotiations were initiated with the Taliban themselves in Qatar and Pakistan. They took place on a bilateral level without the Afghan government. So there was only the US government and the Taliban representatives. And despite the title, has anyone seen the title of this agreement that was eventually presented, maybe? I think it went along the lines of Agreement for Bringing Peace to Afghanistan. That was the official title. But if you read it, it's quite clearly not a peace agreement, but an exit agreement for American troops to leave the country. And I believe Trump ended too fast and too easily 20 years of intervention, investments, and human sacrifices on both sides, both the Americans as well as the local Afghans. And there were barely any political conditions set for the Taliban. These four factors played a major role in explaining how and why the Taliban regained power after 20 years of war, with more than 40 countries participating in the conflict. Now, we've all seen what happened in August last year. I think everyone has seen the images on their screens. That brings me to my final point before I invite Robert to join us. Does this mean that all is lost? I personally don't think so. I actually think quite significant steps have been achieved. If you look at the amount of schools that were built, the amount of universities established around the country, the roads rebuilt, and this example is the famous Royal Palace of Kabul. That's how it looked like after the war in the 80s and 90s. And this is the palace right now. So on the one hand, things have improved, but on the other hand, of course, there are financial sanctions, and the fighting has come to an end, but we're dealing, yes, please, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't understand correctly. Did this improvement happen after Taliban came to power?
No, sorry. Sorry, this is the result of the past 20 years of intervention. So I don't think the Taliban has built anything of this level yet. But I think the intervention has been mixed. So there have been human sacrifices and costs, and at the same time, things have been built in the country. So we're here right now with the legacy of the intervention and financial sanctions in place, ultra-conservatives in power, stories of famine and women's rights being challenged. And this is, I think, the right time to invite Robert to share some of his observations. Robert, please tell us, what did you see as you traveled through the country? Thank you very much. Yeah. Water drinken?
Dadelijk. Wijs, thank you very much. I would like to, if you permit, to add one point why the Taliban got back to power in a way so easily. And the reason is that they never really lost power. They were powerless maybe in Kabul, but in huge areas of the country, they were the boss. I can tell you something that relates to that, and it goes back to the first trip I made to Afghanistan, which was in 2018. I was working on a book on the relics of the Prophet, and in a very late stage, I discovered that possibly the most important relic, apart from his remains, which are buried in Medina, in Arabia, is the mantle that he was wearing when he was invited for a visit by God. He visited God in the throne hall of God. And that is considered by many Muslims as that the cloak that he was wearing, the mantle that he was wearing, is by many considered the most important relic. And there is a very important relic. There is the mantle is in Istanbul, and in a very late stage, I discovered there is another place where they claim we have the real mantle, and that is Kandahar. So, and that was in 2018, and when I heard about it, I felt like I have to go. I have to get to Kandahar. I cannot write and finish this book without bringing up the mantle of Kandahar. So I went to the embassy of Afghanistan in The Hague, which at that time, it was still the time of Ashraf Ghani, Ancien Regime. And the ambassador there, by coincidence, had been the governor of Kandahar. And so he had like this whole network, and he said, oh, I'm going to help you. And of course, I was very pleased with that. And so I said, well, by the way, when I am in Kandahar, I would also like to pay a short visit to Uruzgan, where there were the Dutch troops under Commander Richard van Harskamp, part of the Western Alliance. And he said, no way. No way. He said, I will permit you to go to Kandahar, but you will not put one foot outside Kandahar. And the reason was that the whole area around Kandahar was not under control of the Western Alliance, or let's say the government plus the Western Alliance. So there already it became clear to me that the Taliban was I'm now talking that played in 2018, was very, very powerful and had a grip on many, many areas. I would even say maybe most of the areas. And by the Western Alliance, this of course was not a very popular thing to talk about. We were winning and we are gaining terrain, etc. It was simply not true. The Taliban, in very large part, were actually in power. I would like, if you permit, quickly go to the reason that I wrote this book. A number of years ago, I visited Turkey, the city of Istanbul, the Topkapi. And the Topkapi is the museum, was the former palace of the Sultan and is today a very large, important museum. And in that palace, there is 2 halls dedicated to relics of the Prophet. And I felt like, okay, I'll have a look. And most Western tourists don't go there. They have one particular interest. It is the harem area. They love to go there and make selfies at where the Sultan was keeping the harem. The halls with the relics are basically by Western tourists neglected, not by Muslim tourists, but by Western tourists. In those halls, one of the things that they show is a golden box. And the box is closed, so you don't... there is a little sign saying, inside, a tooth of the Prophet. And I felt like, how can this be? Like, a tooth of the Prophet all the way in Turkey, why not in Saudi Arabia? And I felt like, almost like an epiphany. I felt like, right on that moment, I felt like I'm going to write a book about relics of the Prophet Muhammad, I felt like behind every relic there must be a fascinating story. And actually, it turned out to be true. Now, I think the most important relic after the remains of the Prophet in Medina is the mantle of the Prophet. And I met in Istanbul the old Sufi family, which for many, many generations had been keeping that mantle. And I got to know them, I got to know the head of the family, and he told me actually some, let's say, secrets that prove that this mantle is for real. And you can see them, you can read them in the book. I will not go into that. When I went to Kandahar, I met the guardian. It also happens to be an old Sufi family. I met the guardian of the mantle in Kandahar. And he also gave a secret why the mantle in Kandahar is the real one. I think we have a little clip. Yeah, I think this always goes wrong, but you know the law of Murphy. Oh yeah, by the way, this is traveling in Afghanistan. You don't become friends with the Taliban, of course. We are too different. Also, by the way, I should mention that I may now start telling some things which can be very, very upsetting for Dutch soldiers who have had comrades killed by the Taliban. So I'm fully aware that what I'm going to tell, for many of them, may be extremely painful. But anyway, when you travel in many Taliban, they want to have selfies with you. It's sort of like a... I never ask them why, but this is what happens basically all the time. This is in Bamiyan province.
In the center of the country.
In the center of the country, where you had like the large Buddha statues. Oh yeah, this is maybe useful. Kandahar is sort of, you know, is sort of here in the south. That was. Dit gaat heel goed. Dus the first trip. No, I'm sorry. My first trip, 2018, was to Kandahar. But at that time, I was not allowed to leave the town. It was considered extremely dangerous once you would put foot outside of the city. So when the Taliban took over, I was very curious to get back to Kandahar and hear like what has happened with the mantle, what has happened with the guardian, the old Sufi family, the Akhundzadeh, who were keeping the mantle. What was the ambience in the town? So that's why at the beginning of this year, let's say in autumn, I went back to Kandahar. And then on a second trip, which actually, if you also count 2018 as the first trip, would have been my third trip, I decided to go to the north, to go to an area which is completely different, particularly in the sense of ethnic differences. The three provinces, they are Turkmen, Uzbek, and Tajik. And it makes them very, very different from the Taliban, who are almost exclusively Pashtun from the south of the country. So that's basically what brought me also to the north. And one of the reasons also that also made me very curious about the north was that I had heard by some rumors and some articles that girls' schools in the north are open, and that girls in all those three provinces enjoy secondary school education. And to make it even more amazing, and that's really what I found out when I traveled there, is that is fully supported by the local Taliban. Local Taliban being Uzbek, Turkmen, Tajik. So not really by the hardcore Taliban from Kandahar, but by local Taliban. And actually, the secondary school education for girls never stopped. It was going on during the ancien regime of Ashraf Ghani. And when the Taliban took over, they simply didn't change anything about it. And they actually even support the schools. But maybe I'm getting too much in the school. I should get back to my notes. Sorry. So we have. I can show you. If that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. There should be the clip. Oh, okay. This is in the sanctuary where the mantle is being kept. Between those candles, there is a window, and behind the window, there is a casket, and in that casket is the mantle, wrapped in 70 pieces of cloth. So when I went to the Afghan embassy in The Hague, the ambassador said, I mean, why go to Kandahar? You won't even see it, because that mantle is never shown. The last time, or hardly ever, the last time it was shown was in the 30s of last century, when there was a very serious cholera epidemic in the south of the country. And so that's when it was being shown. But afterwards, it was never shown. It was always kept wrapped up in those 70 pieces of cloth in a casket, and that casket behind glass. So the ambassador, why would you want to do this? But I felt I have to do it, and I was particularly, of course, interested in the stories of the Guardian. And the Guardian gave me the secret of the cloak. Why is it the real cloak? And for that, you have to know something about the body of the Prophet Muhammad. He had a tumor exactly between his two shoulder blades. And the tumor had the size and the form of half a pigeon egg. So it was not like a very freaky tumor, like with all kinds of like little loose pieces. No, it was like a very smooth, beautiful tumor, but pretty large. And some of his followers felt that more in general, the Islamic community felt that tumor was the seal of the Prophet. It was the proof of the Prophet. And of course, for many of his followers, his body was holy, but that pigeon egg, so to say, was even more holy. So what people would do is that like they would come and greet the Prophet and then quickly try to put their hand inside his cloth and touch the tumor. Of course, the Prophet didn't really like that, but being a prophet comes with a price. So he accepted that happened. So that mantle in Afghanistan is very, very important. And according to Akhundzadeh, they have the proof that the mantle is for real, because what he told me is that exactly on the place where the Prophet had that tumor, the mantle was showing wear and tear. And so that's why he came to the conclusion, this is the real one, not the one in Istanbul.
Shall we show who Akhundzadeh is?
Yes, we have. You already saw it, probably. Even kijken, we have to go back when, I think. Oh yeah, here he is. You can see a sort of like a little bit of vain man, but an extremely interesting man. We had many long conversations. Many of them you will find actually also in the book. Now, we also have a picture of an event that took place in 1996. That is when Afghanistan was in chaos. Warlords everywhere, fighting everywhere. It was a total anarchy, and there was only a small part where there were not really warlords, but where there was a movement that was much more based on religion, which was the Taliban, and they had its leader, Mullah Omar. Now, the Taliban had already for a few years, they had taken a pretty strong position in Kandahar and also in the wider region. But they were sort of like stuck because the other warlords were also very strong. And then something happened that gave a complete change in the country. And that was when Mullah Omar showed the mantle of the Prophet to the local population. The day before, there were sound cars that went... oh yes, even kijken, we can go. There were sound speaker cars announcing to the people something very important is going to happen in this or this mosque. So come and you will be very impressed. So many people from Kandahar came to that particular mosque. And on the day of the event, the mantle was brought to that mosque. The Taliban had to put very high pressure on the keepers of the mantle, the family Akhundzadeh, to lend out that mantle. Of course, they didn't want to do that. It would only be shown in a big, maybe academy. So they were very much against it. Yet they were also a little bit afraid of the Taliban, who had actual power in the city. So they said, "Okay, you can take it." So it was brought to that mosque, and in front of the mosque was a huge open square, and so a large part of the population came there. And when Mullah Omar went to the roof of the mosque and showed the mantle, he did not put it on, but he showed it. He put like his arms in the mantle. People went crazy with enthusiasm, and the people standing close by, they threw up their turbans. Because they hoped that if the turban would touch the mantle, the turban would also become more or less holy. And even today, among people, among the population in Kandahar, like one of the most favored little presents that can be given are little pieces of the turban, of a turban that touched the mantle. On the evening when Mullah Omar showed the mantle to the population, he was nominated by many scholars and mullahs who had been assembled in Kandahar, the emir of the believers. He became the highest religious authority in the country, maybe not recognized by everybody, but by many people. And what happened with these events, the showing of the mantle, and later that day, his nomination as emir of the believers, is that the Taliban got wings. Although they had been stuck in Kandahar and the region, and okay, they were pretty strong, but the other warlords were also strong. 2 months later, they took Kabul. So here you see there is hardly any pictures available of Mullah Omar. I think in total he was like almost like a hidden. There is maybe 6-7 pictures that exist of him, and this is one of them, where you can see how he lifts the mantle he is standing on the roof of that mosque and is showing already the mantle. And so that moment is something that, in a way, changed the history of Afghanistan. When I got back early this year to Afghanistan, I paid a visit to the National Museum in Kabul. And the reason is that I was very much interested in knowing how does that museum, which has many pictures of faces, of people, statues, how would they deal with the arrival of the Taliban? Would the Taliban close down the museum? Would they permit certain things? Would the museum maybe hide part of the collection, which actually they do? There is some parts that they keep in the cellars, not to upset the Taliban. But on the whole, the Taliban is rather liberal. They know that there is, for instance, exposed little coins which have little naked Greek fighters. So you would say, well, you look risky. Yes, risky, but for the moment, Taliban has not yet done anything against it. I had a discussion with the director of the museum, and of course we spoke about how he how it is to safeguard his collection vis-à-vis the Taliban. But we also got to talk about Kandahar, and I spoke about the mantle. And then he said something which, when he told me, I immediately felt, yes, this is something that I completely missed. What he said is that by handling the mantle, by carrying that incredibly sacred object, he himself became also a little bit a holy man. He became sacred. And when he told me that, I felt like this is something that we probably, as Western Alliance, were completely unaware of. And I happen to know the former commander of in Uruzgan, Colonel Richard Harskamp. He was our commander when we had the Dutch troops in Afghanistan, and so he was. I did something. Okay. He was the commander in 2008. I wrote to Richard, the Western Alliance, were they aware of this whole mental event? Were they aware of the supposed holiness of Mullah Omar? And he said we were completely unaware of it, completely unaware. He, as commander of the Dutch, he was part of, let's say, the circuit of people, the high commanders, the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Germans, the people who were dealing with the top, most interesting intelligence information. And he said, no, we never took that take on the Taliban nor on Mullah Omar. So, in a way, we never understood the enemy. We never understood the Taliban. And I think that, had we known about this, maybe through psychological warfare, maybe, I don't know how, but maybe we could have diminished the status of Mullah Omar, but we didn't, because we were not aware. We were seeing Mullah Omar, you had the diagram, they were, can we go back actually to, the Taliban in the upper right corner, insurgents. they were seen as insurgents. They were never seen as people who were actually trying to defend Afghanistan against foreign influences, particularly non-Muslim influences.
Can I ask
Yes.
a question? For our understanding, I think most people know that there are many different warlords, many different tribes in Afghanistan. I thought a number of them are all Taliban. Is that so, or is that only one tribe?
Well, it's basically it's only Pashtun. And that's one of the big problems in Afghanistan now, that the Taliban does not really want to include too much non-Pashtun. And in the long run, this is going to create a huge problem, but not in the short term.
There are also many Pashtun tribes, different tribes.
Yeah, but they all, and actually, yes, you have, for instance, you have the Haqqani network, you have the traditional Kandahar Pashtun, but basically they're all, let's say, their background is the same. And actually, talking about the background, I would like to mention something that many people are maybe not aware of, but the Taliban are, in a way, a Sufi movement. They are not like the Al-Qaeda, they are not Wahhabi, not at all. They feel terrible about the Al-Qaeda. They never invited Al-Qaeda. It was the Americans who pushed Al-Qaeda to go into Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. But between Taliban and Al-Qaeda, the relation was also always very, very difficult because they have a completely different approach. The Taliban, their background is, particularly in the higher levels, is Deobandi. And
These Pashtun tribe leaders, these warlords, don't they fight each other now that the Taliban...
Well, there is some tension between Haqqani network and the leadership in Kandahar, but that's I think the only infighting that we are as outsiders aware of. But I'm sorry, if I may, I will continue for the Deobandi. The Deobandi is a movement from India. It started about 2 centuries ago, north of New Delhi. There was a madrasa where founded by a number of people who were many among them were Sufi, and their idea was that Islam should be saved, and that deserved a fight with the British. So the Deoband, let's say, if you take the 2 crucial points of the Deobandi, is a liberation war and is this Sufi teaching. And the Taliban took this over. For them, their fight is or was against the Western Alliance, and their teaching is Sufi. And you can say, no, but Sufi, they sit in formal Persian gardens, and they need little fountains and rows of beautiful cypress, and they think about God, how to get closer to God. You have other Sufi orders, which are the Sufi of the sword, the Sufi that are prepared to fight. And strangely enough, Ramdan Kadyrov of Chechnya, he is also a Sufi. And he is also, I mean, this sounds completely weird, completely out of the box, but it's true. He is a Sufi, he's from a Sufi tradition, and he, like the Taliban, they are Sufis of the sword. They are prepared to fight for the preservation of Islam. Actually, Deoband influence in England is huge. As you're probably aware, most of the Muslims in England are not coming from let's say from Morocco or from Turkey, but from India, Pakistan, and all those migrants took Deobandi teaching with them, and not all of them, but many did so. And now, according to several scientific studies, the Deobandi in England, thinking in the Afghan way, thinking in the Deoband way as it is in India, they are very assertive, and about 40% of all religious institutions, mosques, madrasas are Deoband. And the English are not worried about it, but in their thinking, they're in the same line as the Taliban. Oh, I think we are running terribly. Now, my second trip this year was to the north of the country, and it's different. It's not Pashtun. It's more. It feels much more free, much more. Also, let's say the ambiance to me seems much more relaxed than it is in the south. And one of the things that I came across is that I already mentioned it before. Is that the girls' schools in the north are open, and they get the support of the Taliban. The Taliban does not have money to upgrade the schools, but they do have the money to pay the teachers, and they do. So I went to a number of those schools, and I did so with the approval of the local Taliban. Actually, in Sheberghan, when I went to the Directorate of Education to find out whether the schools were actually open, he said, no, they're open, and we're happy that they're open. If you want to, we can take you to a school. I said, yeah, sure. And so we visited the school. It has 3,000 pupils. And in a moment, I'll show you a few clips. The school has 3,000 pupils, 2,000 girls in the morning, 1,000 boys in the afternoon. And yes, there was secondary education taking place, and that gave me. Now I'm changing a little bit the tone because I got very enthusiastic about this. We all want girls to have the possibility to have secondary school in Afghanistan. So when I was there, I told the teachers and I told the pupils that when I'm back in Holland, I'm going to try to see if we can support some of those schools. And it would not be very easy because there's no banking, traffic, how do you control the money flows? There is many aspects that make it maybe difficult, but still I felt like I'm going to propose that Holland provides aid. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs has said how horrible it is. He said that just like about a month ago, how horrible it is that in Afghanistan girls don't go to secondary school. And it's simply not true. So in that area, they do go to school. So if he finds it so terrible that many of those schools are closed, then should he not be feeling obliged to help schools that are open? I'll show you. Oh yeah, this is some some more clips with Taliban. Everywhere they want to be on pictures with you. Here again, this is behind us is the big niche where there was the statue of Buddha, and they have no they don't see why we might be upset about that that statue being destroyed. So they pay visits to see where they actually blew up that fantastic Buddha. So here is they simply love this. Okay, well, we had this one already, I think. Oh, okay. Because. So this is at one of the checkpoints.
Checking your Facebook.
Yeah. So they want to say they love it. They. Oh yeah, here. This is in Schebergam. This is in one of the tents. I'm sorry? The tents are UNICEF, like the school board. So the schools are, let's say, many of the schools have been many years neglected. And so the only way to still continue with education is with tents. And so the Taliban can pay the teachers and maybe some of the school books, but not renovate, for instance, the schools. So I think there is huge needs where I think Dutch aid might actually be welcome.
Study at some place. They study in the hot weather in the tent, and I doesn't have any book, doesn't have chairs to the seat, and we have no chair. Our students and some classes are sitting at the roof, and they can't sit in chairs. We doesn't have book, and we doesn't have any sample or a class that students are studied here. To the what can I say again? We doesn't have a lot of. We have a lot of problems to this school.
And what would for you be the most important thing to happen in this school?
What to say to you?
Welcome to our school. I want to fix my school because it's a necessary thing for me because I want to learn and more learn an education. For this reason, we really want to fix this school, and we are very thankful you can come here and you can tell our problem and another person that can help me. Thank you very much.
Oh, help! No, we are not supposed to. Oh, maybe I could show this because the one of the things that you would have with helping schools in the north of Afghanistan is that there is no banking system. So my suggestion, I already spoke about it with the ministry.
Because of the financial sanctions. So
oh yes,
you
sure.
Really, send money or withdraw money to the banks.
So you have to find a way around the absence of normal banking traffic, and in Afghanistan there is what is called hawala. And those of you with an Afghan background, they probably know the word hawala. Hawala is informal money transfers, like you have agents. I used it myself to get money because I needed extra money. Traveling in Afghanistan is terribly expensive. So what you do, you go to the hawala market. In a moment, I will show you, and you say that you want, let's say, 3,000 euros. They call their agent in Holland. If they say, okay, we can transfer, then you do with your, let's say, ING app, you send the money to that agent in this case it was Rotterdam. They receive it within seconds, and they authorize their counterpart in Kabul to pay me the 3,000 minus a small commission of 2 or 3%. So it's a highly efficient, and where normally an international money transfer by the banks to a faraway country that may take up to a week. If you have your network, getting money in Kabul takes about 2 minutes. And the country is actually living with Hawala. All imports, exports are done in that way. It's also one of the signs, and maybe later we can still, if we still have time, we could get to that, that the economy is actually not on the brink of collapse, but on the brink of an upswing. I'm optimistic about the economy of Afghanistan. There's many things happening where you feel like, okay, this is going to be a fruit. Later maybe we can go into that if you're interested. But they are heading towards an important economic upswing. And one of the reasons, and one of the things where it shows is the ease with which the money markets operate. I will now show you the money market, the Hawala market in Kabul, and where all these transactions are being done. The turnover of that market per day is about $65 million. So money going out, money coming in, $65 million per day. If you take into account the Hawala markets, let's say in Mazar-e Sharif, in Herat, Kandahar, it's well over $100 million that is being moved every day. So that's billions and billions of money, of dollars on a year basis. One of the things where you feel like, no, this country is not on the brink of collapse. It's a bit a chaotic clip, but and it's completely safe. They have sometimes up to $50,000, $60,000 in their hands walking around. It's about 1,000 traders. Okay, I think this more or less. Do we still?
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? I try to understand the actual peace in Afghanistan. We all know that Afghanistan was flooded with weapons, and when a country is full of weapons, it's very hard to generate peace. So, on the other hand, there are many different tribes. They are still there, different warlords, different. Okay, that's solved that problem apparently, but the weapons are still there. So what happened to them? Are they being traded abroad, or where are all the weapons?
Basically, all the weapons are now in the hands of the Taliban. Of course, many people will have their own weapons hidden somewhere. I've no illusion about it. Afghanistan at this moment is incredibly safe. I've traveled. The first trip that I made this year was about 3 weeks. The second trip was 3 weeks. So 6 weeks traveling really inside the country. During all that time, nor in daytime, nor in nighttime, did I hear one shot. One of the signs that it's peaceful is that you now have everywhere in Afghanistan, you have business traffic, trucking. It's something that hardly happened in the time of Ashraf Ghani. Now, wherever you go, you'll see huge lines of trucks. That's also one of the reasons why I think the country is heading towards an economic upswing. This safety gives a boost to the country. You now can go anywhere, and the same goes for traders. You don't have to pay checkpoints anymore. You don't have to pay warlords anymore. You can go everywhere. There is a few exceptions. There is an area around Jalalabad, and there is a small area in the northeast, the Panjshir Valley. But that's minimal looking at the whole of the country. It's extremely safe, and that's also giving, I think, for the time being, a bonus to the Taliban. People know that if the Taliban would be gone, the chaos would return. So this is a premium of the Taliban for the people.
Is this a recommendation for traveling, or?
Well, you still have to be. You still have to be careful. I like to give, for my own example, you would never travel without a local translator fixer. There can be misunderstandings. I might have been seen as a, let's say, as a leftover from the CIA, and so people would say, "Hey, wait, my brother was killed by some CIA troops. We are going to take revenge on you." So you need somebody who can quickly explain what you're doing there. And actually, when you say that you're a writer, they liked it very much. And when you then, on top of it, say that you have this Islamic item of writing about the relics of the Prophet Muhammad, they're everywhere. I was treated very, very well by Taliban and also by the local population. Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering, do you believe that the humanitarian? Thank you. Do you believe that the humanitarian benefits of providing aids, say to schools, to girls' schools in the north of Afghanistan, outweighs the perhaps long-term negative humanitarian impact of aiding such a regime at all?
Sorry, even kijken. Kun je nog één keer de vraag zeggen?
Yeah, I was wondering whether you believe that the long-term, whether you believe that the short-term positive impact of aiding financially such a girls' schools in the north of Afghanistan outweighs the long-term, perhaps negative humanitarian impacts of helping a regime sort of satisfy the needs of the population. And
well, you're not really, by giving aid, I think that you would not be helping the Taliban, you would be helping the schools. You're actually doing something in the same line of what the Taliban is doing, which is helping girl education. I mean, they pay all the teachers. That's about it. They don't, like the Taliban has huge tax income. About, for this year it will probably be like around $2 billion. But they also have in the country a payroll of about 1 million people that they have to pay. Ministry of Education, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Roads, Bridges. So you see, basically, people are working, but there is very few new things because there is no money left over really for investment. So you would be, I think, supporting the schools. You would do something that the Taliban would also like to do if they would have some more money.
Well, yes, but if, from what I gather, the local minority populations are very happy with girls being able to go to school, right?
No, I think actually in the whole of the country, people would be happy. But
yes.
there is
but so if you take that away by not giving them the money, if you don't give them the money to do that, or if they'd run out of cash to finance girls' schooling in the north, perhaps support for the regime would be smaller because of unhappiness with the public services provided by the new government?
Can I maybe reflect a little bit on that? I get the point, but I think it's a contentious one because in many other countries like Iran, North Korea, and even now with Russia, you see that actually financial sanctions on the regime or on the population themselves do not often lead to regime change or a change in the policy of the regime. So I think the same could apply and would apply most likely to Afghanistan. So even if you would, from the bottom up, take away this opportunity, I think it's quite unlikely that the Taliban would be removed as a regime force in the country. In fact, in the 90s, when they had even fewer resources, fewer security means, they had most of the girls' schools closed and there was nothing happening in the country for more than 5 years. So I think it's a little bit of a difficult one.
Well, also, the way I proposed it to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is that no money goes to the Taliban. The money would go to the schools. And the schools, they have what is called like a shura, like a school council, in which the director is represented, but also the pupils, the parents of pupils, and some local people, but not, let's say, Taliban. So the decision on how it would be used would not be done by the Taliban, but would be decided by the Shura. And the Shura would receive the money through, let's say, the director of the school or the treasurer, who would receive, in his or her turn, the money through Hawala from some organization from Holland. So I more see it like working with the Taliban for the same aim, but not in any way supporting the Taliban. The Taliban said, if you want to do this, we would be very happy with it. The only thing we would like to happen is that you keep us informed, which I think is reasonable and is not implying sort of like cooperation with the Taliban.
Wie geeft u de beurt?
Oh ja, ik zag daar een...
Een heleboel handen.
Oh, even kijken. Oh ja, no.
You are talking about the Taliban as an homogeneous organization.
I'm sorry,
as an homogeneous organization, as more or less. But the Taliban in the south seems to me, according to your story, completely different from the Taliban in the north. How is that possible in a real organization?
Well, on the whole, the Taliban is organized in a very military way. If in Kandahar the top leadership decides that things happen in a certain way, they will happen in a certain way. The Taliban will keep to that. There is, let's say, the most clear division within the Taliban in the south is between the Haqqani network, which is more towards Kabul and some provinces southeast, and Kandahar. There is, in the north, there is some local Taliban, and they are not Pashtun. But it's only, let's say, in those three areas, and I think it has to do with the fear of the Taliban of the Northern Alliance. Of course, when the Taliban took over power, particularly after this whole show of the mantle of the Prophet, there was the big competition in the country was between the Taliban and the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance does not exist anymore, and the General Dostum has fled from the country. But there is a small new resistance movement coming up, the Northern Resistance Front. So the Northern Alliance has now like a little daughter, a little son, let's say. And the Taliban, I think, is obviously worried about like a re-emergence of Northern Alliance-like feelings. So for me, the Taliban, let's say basically the fact that in the north there is Taliban of a different, let's say, non-Pashtun Taliban, I think is a very political decision by, let's say, Haqqani Network and Kandahar, and more in particular, actually, Kandahar. This is not just happening like this. They think about these kind of things, and I think that giving some independence to those 3 northern provinces is a very specific, clear policy followed by Taliban. Yes.
Thank you. I have 2 questions which are not very related. But my first is, you mentioned this market with money exchange, and you mentioned that there is a very huge amount of this exchange. For what purposes? Who changed money there?
Well, it's basically all imports and exports are done through hawala payments. So if you import 10 trucks of oil from Iran, the payment is done with hawala. So there will be a hawala agent in Tehran, and there will be a hawala agent in Herat or in Kabul. It keeps the economy going, and actually in a very smooth way. Of course, with hawala, you cannot buy a jumbo jet. I mean, there are certain limits, but let's say up to transactions of maybe like $5–10 million. It's no problem to do imports, exports, and it works very, very smoothly. It goes very quick. They're incredibly well organized. To give you one example, the market in Kabul, as I said, has about 1,000 traders. These traders have their own WhatsApp groups. So if you say one trader, listen, I'm looking for one of your correspondents in Holland, and he should have an ING account. So he throws it in the WhatsApp group. And so about 300–400 people will see that. And some of them will react to it. And he does that also with 2 or 3 other WhatsApp groups. So within a few minutes, you have the name of the person in Holland with his ING account, etc. Because I have an ING account, it was important to do like a very quick transfer. So they're incredibly well organized. We think, like, Afghanistan, nothing is working. It's not like that.
My second question was about, would it be possible for a woman traveler to travel like you that time in Afghanistan?
Absolutely, and it's happening. There is people from NGOs, there is from media, from basically UN, for instance. No, there are many women travel through the country, and I don't think they have any problems. They have to hide their hair, but I think otherwise no problem.
A practical thing, maybe if you look at YouTube, there are many vloggers who kind of, like Robert, traveled there, and also female travelers who document what they see and they report their travel, just in case you want to see how it works.
Neither one of you mentioned the role of Pakistan. It seems that I've been to other events of Afghanistan, and Pakistan is never mentioned. So I was wondering, is Pakistan no role in Afghanistan? They receive billions of dollars of aid from the United States, for instance. How do you two see Pakistan and the role in Afghanistan?
I think you would know more about that.
In the case of Pakistan, there is always this ambiguous policy they have. So indeed, they collaborate with the Americans to get aid for domestic reasons or foreign policy. But then on the other hand, there are clear evidences that the Pakistani government is actually funding and helping the Taliban. From my understanding, they are still, to an extent, engaged with the Taliban. Maybe not at the highest level, but definitely at the military level. And of course, the Taliban has been able to resist the pressure for the past 20 years by living to a large extent in Pakistan. And collecting weapons there, collecting financial means, and so on. So I don't think that all of that has ended after August 21. I think there is still quite a big infrastructure, probably more unofficial than we can see, but it's definitely present, yeah.
I could maybe also mention that the economic relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan is very, very important. To give one example, there is huge exports of coal for the coal centrales. How do you say that in English? Power stations in Pakistan. And so from the north of Afghanistan, there is huge exports. It's hundreds of trucks per day going to Pakistan. And now with the high prices of energy, Afghanistan is profiting enormously of that. There is all the talc powder leaving Afghanistan to Pakistan, Afghanistan to go to Pakistan. You have what's called the Spin Gor, the White Mountains. It's mountains that are pure talc. And so when any of you as father, mother, grandfather, grandmother use Johnson & Johnson baby powder, it comes from Afghanistan. It's a huge exports. Another thing, because of the safety that you now have in the country, there is very serious work now going to start on the gas pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India. It's a very old project. It never, under Ashraf Ghani, it started up a little bit, but it was too much, with the time, too much on safety. Now the country is safe, and it is now, I would think, within 2 or 3 years, that pipeline will be finished, and it's going to change the role of Afghanistan in the energy field in a very big way.
If I can be a devil's advocate, it sounds a bit like strong man or woman is the best thing for economic development of a country. So all Latin America should follow such a model, for instance. If it guarantees security, then human rights seem to be less important.
We tried.
Well, I'm just asking. I'm just wondering, because the enthusiasm, I mean, China also has a great economic development model, it seems. And if you look at Latin America, they're looking at the United States and Europe and thinking the European Union, it's nonsense. I talked to your Argentinian diplomat recently, and they don't care anymore. He didn't care anymore about China. That's where it's at. And if I hear the success story that Afghanistan seems to be, that's another thing. So EU is, why the emphasis on human rights if economic development is more important, it seems?
Well, I don't think I'm saying that. No, but I think, no, what I'm basically sort of amazed about is how the narrative is that the country is at the brink of a collapse. You read it over, and nobody is actually thinking about it. Sort of like, is this really happening? Everywhere in the country, and that's not a story of the Taliban, but everywhere in the country you will find gasoline, diesel. It's available everywhere. And one of the things where, if you have really like a collapsing economy, is where you have no more gas at the gas station. In Afghanistan, it simply doesn't happen. There is most of these economic things that are happening are driven not by the Taliban. The Taliban don't have a clue. They are not materialistic. They don't know about these things. It's driven by the local population, who are very, very entrepreneurial. They are excellent truckers. They are excellent. I mean, they're very, very strong. Like this money market, that's not a Taliban thing. Taliban doesn't even know what's going on. Well, they know, they understand, but basically it's driven, what's happening now in the economic field is driven by the local population, and partly also driven by the ignorance and the non-capacity of the Taliban to manage things. The Taliban just let things go. They need the ministries, they need the experts, and they lean on those people to have things running. The Taliban, most of them are the last 20 years they were like in mountain villages. They haven't got a clue about Hawala, about how you negotiate with Turkmenistan and Pakistan a huge treaty about a pipeline. That's not. I mean, Taliban will be involved from a political point of view, but the technicalities are not done by them. And sort of in a way, the fact that the Taliban is not managing the economy, that's helping the economy a lot.
If the question is whether the...
By the way, just Venezuela also has a very good halal, like in Somalia too.
Yes.
But Venezuela too, which according to international reporters, the average population lost 38 kilos in the last 3 years, plus or minus. And so it's rather confusing if you put it that way.
Yeah, I think what Robert also tried to say is that the general notion of an economic collapse or the country as a whole being at the brink of starvation, that might be a little bit more nuanced than mentioned in some reports. So there were stories about 95% of the population not having access to food this year, and it seems that that's not fully the case. Whether the Taliban is a strong or important economic actor in managing all of this, I don't think so, to be honest. If you find a woman on a bottle as a marketing trick, contentious and difficult to admit and to accept, that I'm not sure whether they will be able to do much more in terms of economic strategic thinking. But that's just a simple thought, yeah.
U mag de vragen uitdelen.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yes, please, yeah.
Thank you for your explanation. I heard you talk about the North and North versus the South, but I didn't understand who are the people who are in North and whether you're aware of the ethnic agenda of the Taliban, or because I heard the Islamic part of it and them being Sufis and religious. I just wonder how much did you think or see the ethnic or care to see the ethnic notion of the Taliban ever since their first arrival and second arrival? That is my first question. My second question is, you said it was safe. That, for me as a native, comes like an arrow to my heart, because it might be safe for you, but for many, many people, it isn't safe. For me, it wouldn't be safe. For a lot of girls who protest on the streets or within their neighborhoods, it's not safe. Women are abducted, raped, and forced to marry the Taliban with an ethnic agenda. I am questioning myself in what degree do you care or know to put emphasis on these inhuman acts of the Taliban. And my third remark was, please, when you say Afghan, and this goes to the first two remarks, Afghan is not a term that is accepted by the majority of the people. That is, according to us, a colonial term invented by the British and implemented upon us. I don't know if you're aware, in the parliament there were huge discussions on this name and term from the natives. So when you categorize a whole big nation consisting of different ethnicities as Afghan, I don't know, it raised the question for me, like, how aware are you of the ethnic tensions and ethnic agenda of the Taliban? And please, when you refer to them, I would kindly request you to use the term terrorist as well, because they are terrorists. They came with terrorism to power. Thank you very much.
It was three questions. The first one, in a nutshell.
How aware are you of the ethnic, ethno-fascist agenda of the Taliban?
I think the Taliban is very, very aware of the ethnic dimensions of their organization, and I think they're very careful to not to create a situation in the north where the north would restart aggression against the Taliban. The north has basically three large ethnic groups: the Turkmen, the Uzbek, and the Tajik. And they are not only ethnically, by language, they are different. And I think that the Taliban, let's say the leadership in Kandahar is definitely, when they let certain things happen in the north, I think that's definitely within mind a political agenda to keep the country under control, not to have like a new embryonic Northern Alliance come about. So I think they're very, very aware of that. I think also in the long run, for the Taliban, that this exclusion of all the other groups, because it's not just like in the north. You have the in Bamiyan
Hazara?
The Hazara. The Hazara are an incredibly important group. They're in the middle of the country. The heart of the country is Hazara. They are, in a way, from more like Central Asian, Mongol origin. They are also very, very different. And they also, the Taliban has to somehow accommodate the Hazara also. So it's not just the north. There is a whole policy towards the Hazara. And towards the Hazara, somehow I think they are more tough, maybe the Hazara less well organized than they are in the north. But that ethnic dimension is there all the time. Sorry, I don't know if that was the good, sufficient. The second question, in a nutshell, was.
You mentioned the North. I was wondering who is the North, and I would like to emphasize that you said Turkmen, Hazaras, and Tajik, but when there never has been a real counting of the population, but the basic difference between the Taliban in the north or the majority of the people is the Persian language and non-Persian language. And I don't know how much you're aware of their ethnic agenda in the sense that they are killing Tajiks, they are killing Hazaras and they are displacing them from their homes in Takhar, in Panjshir, in Uruzgan, to displace people and take their lands and bring the Pashtun population from Pakistan. So my point with ethnic agenda was like the Afghan, what you call Afghan, or the Pashtuns, are in a group in Afghanistan, but 40 million of them live in Pakistan. And I would like to see a more emphasis on the ethnic agenda. The second question was referring to them as terrorists. And how do you see that when you are there with them and not mentioning them as terrorists as they are and came to power?
Well, I find that a very difficult question. When you travel around and you come across Taliban, and you come across them all the time because you need papers, you need to pass checkpoints, etc. My contacts were not really friendly, but they were okay. Do they, at this moment, do they feel for an outsider traveling around Afghanistan as terrorists? Not at this moment. Do I know about their past and what they did? Yes, I'm aware of that. So will many of them have done terrorist things? Absolutely. But today, I think on the whole, in that sense, in sort of in the sense of terrorism, I don't think a lot is going on, to be quite honest. And yes, I mean, you mentioned situations like where women are abducted. When you travel, you don't notice when you. I'm sorry, I'm not a, let's say, human rights investigator. I'm not. I simply travel around, and do I see women being abducted? No. Do I see villages being burned down or empty? No, I didn't see it. Did I ask? Did I investigate? No, I did not.
Given the time, shall we go to the final question? Is there anyone with a final question? I think there is one with in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, you said that most Taliban are Pashtuns, but as far as I know, and I've seen on the media and Facebook and stuff, I've seen that they usually also speak the language from Pakistan, and that when there's this whole stereotype of them being Pashtuns only, but for me personally, I've seen people speaking Urdu, Hindi from Pakistan, the language of Pakistan and India. Is it true that you also maybe have encountered Taliban from other places instead only from Pashtun areas?
Well, I've come across Taliban in the north who were non-Pashtun and who are Dari speakers, a language more like Persian. But I think you would know more about like Urdu influence.
I think it relates a little bit back to what Mr. here on the left. Sorry, what was your name? Mr. Henry said, when the Taliban, as I said, during the U.S. intervention were partly in Pakistan, a lot of the young soldiers and fighters were literally going to Pakistani schools, madrasas, and so on. So I think there is an element of language. How much more, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure whether there are Hindi-speaking Taliban leaders or anything like that, but... the soldiers, most definitely, some of them are speaking Urdu as well, yeah. Given that, I think we went quite a lot over time. Thank you very much, everyone, for the questions. Thank you, Robert, for your observations and your reflections on traveling through Afghanistan. And I just wanted to highlight one final thing, and I think it's thank you for the question as well. What we did is, in the first part, reflected mostly on which political conditions brought the Taliban into power. And I reflected on, to an extent, the abandonment by the US of Afghanistan. And I think that has been a very tragic situation. I think the Trump deal was tragic, very bad. They could have done it differently. They could have, but they just simply let the country loose after 20 years of collaboration with the actual government. And after that, we reflected on travels, but that does not mean anything with regards to any kind of justification of Taliban rule or whatsoever. It was just more of a cultural reflection, and I think it relates mostly to the book that Robert has, which is about the relics of the Prophet in the country and his travels with that. Overall, thank you very much, and there are drinks now afterwards.